Caleb Eberhardt stars in the revival of An Enemy of the People on Broadway. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Caleb, I feel like everybody knows something about An Enemy of the People and maybe have seen a production over the years, but you're working with a brand new adaptation by Amy Herzog. What is so
Mhm.
powerful and unique about her version of this story?
Her ability to adhere it to today's world, I'd say. She's a great writer. Um, she's really good at just like honoring the original language and the original story while also just like uh the verb that's coming to me is like just sewing in the needs of today's audience who's watching this. I particularly had have a big reverence for her because of her willingness to hear my specific perspective in making Hovstad a black man and honoring that in the world of the story that we're telling today. It was very important to me that that was acknowledged and talked about, and she was very willing and open to hear my perspective of that and adjust accordingly where it mattered, and that to me is one of the things that makes doing this really fun and really gripping for me every night. Is that
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the character because he's incredibly integral to the story, of course, and an idealist. And I think the audience is so enamored with him at the beginning of the show. And then, of course, as we see one by one, the characters, kind of drift away from our central figure. But what do you admire most about him and what really drew you to the character? And it sounds like, Amy was really open to crafting him with you for this version. So, what was most important to get right about Hovstad?
um I think it eventually landed on how to empathize with Hovstad because it's easy on paper to see him and and pigeonhole him into this. He's a traitor, he's a backstabber, he's two-faced, he's and all those are, if you're watching it from a certain vantage, sure, that's an easy thing to say. But what's a bigger challenge for me and what allowed me to have empathy for him was like why does he make the choice? And I think that choice comes from just like one, it's that he it's not that he doesn't care, and it's not that he is self-serving. It's not that he is uh uh trying to self-preserve. Maybe a little bit, but I think more so he really, really, really cares about people, and he cares about the people that he considers himself an advocate for. Um, and once I figured that out, paired with what the reality, sorry, that's my computer, paired with what the reality of the world is, which is like this is a small town in Norway that is hearing about the dangers and effects of contaminated water for like maybe the first time. Once I paired those two things together, I was like, okay, this is actually an easy decision for him. Not that he is, the way the play's written, he once him and Stockman have that argument, you sort of, if he sort of ends up leaning one way because he gets hurt in that moment also. But once I figured that out, it was easy for me to make the choice and have him make the decision that, okay, I have to protect the people first and foremost. And what I understand is economics. And what I understand is equity. And what I understand is that if this comes out and none of us really understand it, aside from this one person, who am I to tell them uh, that their entire livelihood will be altered because of something one man says that we don't understand fully? And so I come from a place of like, I'm not saying you're wrong, like in the town hall. Come at it from a place where it's like, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying wait on it. I'm saying let's discuss. I'm saying don't read their report just yet. Let's tell the people what the fear is, and then let's talk about it. But I have my personal opinions Stockman and why he can't accept that and why I get so hurt about what he says, because in my head I think he's a bit egotistical, and he's it's a bit too easy for him to call people who don't have his intellect stupid, or like not knowing, and I think there's an anger in Hovstad, because to be black is to be inherently angry, you know what I mean? So when you're given that much with what he says about the dogs and the stray versus the poodle, it's like that shifts him. He goes from being like, let's talk about this, let's go about this ironically moderately, which he sort of pokes at as Loxon for. But once it changes and becomes a bit more uh hostile, then it's just like, all right, now you're forcing my hand, and I have a group of people to protect. And I think ultimately Hofstad wants to protect. And I think he's naive, of course. I think he doesn't know about what Stockman's talking about. But I don't think that makes him a bad person. I just think that makes him naive, and I think it makes him it's a learning experience, I don't think that makes him a bad person. I have a lot of love and respect for Hofstad.
Yeah, I want to dive into that town hall scene you're talking about, especially the moment that you're honing in on, because I think that is so crucial, because it really is the time where Stockman is most likely to lose the support of the audience. It's kind of like, if you're with him through so much of what he's saying, that may be a bridge too far. But I love the way that you play the moment, because as angry as Hofstad might be, I feel like you approach it in a very kind of mediated and cool way. It
Mhm.
doesn't kind of explode the kind of town hall even worse, although we see where the
Yeah.
scene kind of has a really visceral and brutal end. I wanted to ask you about your approach to it, because it's obvious that it's an integral moment for your character, but how did you want to play that moment, and how did you talk with Sam Gold, your director, about finding the perfect way to navigate that really tense exchange?
I think, when I think about the audition, I remember I played it very back-footed and cool. One, because I think that's like a comfortable place for Caleb, and I knew that like it probably wouldn't end up there, but I wanted to have something, and what my thinking behind that was like, here's a man who's like on the hot seat, and I wanted to juxtapose that with sort of like I'm in control, like I'm sort of like, you're getting angry and I'm not. And but what it became in the rehearsal room was like, Sam approached me one day, and he was like, he essentially said, I want to see what happens if Hofstad loses some of that composure in this moment. Um, and I took it as what he was going for was seeing like, you see Hovstad very controlled, very methodical, very cunning, all in, I think, in positive ways. But then you see the sort of veneer crack because it gets personal. And what that ends up doing is it sort of begins to set the tone for where it does end up. Once I started to get a bit more comfortable and we started doing it more and more, my approach became, to be honest, the overall approach that I try to go into it every night generally is I don't know what's coming. I'm here. I've made my decision, although I'm a bit ambivalent about it still, because Stockman is my friend. Um, but I don't know that he's going to say those things about people. I don't know that he's going to say those things about me. And I begin to approach it from a place of like, let's take a step back. I don't like the mayor just as much as you don't like him, but I also don't fully understand what you're saying, and especially at the expense of the people that I am advocating for. So I approach it from there, and then when it becomes personal, um, I I try to allow myself to shift in the moment and try not to place too much, try not to get ahead of myself. But then with each night, depending on how Caleb, am feeling, depending on what the audience is giving, depending on what I'm getting from my fellow actors, sometimes I approach that scene with my own interest in mind, my own feelings in mind. Sometimes I approach it with Petra in mind, because in Act 3, I get rejected, and that's sitting. I almost always come on stage and see Petra talking to Captain Horster and let that sort of like inform something in me. Um, I sometimes I'll clock Jeremy early and just like see how if I can gauge how he's feeling, and sometimes that'll change my trajectory of how I go about it, whether I'm like approaching him from like initially like a gentle pleading place or approaching him from a like think about what you're doing place. Like I don't know, it just changes each night, but always with this like thing in mind, which is like we're all scared, we're all fearful for different reasons. And when it changes, it's important to me for that to happen as it happens. And I try not to get ahead of myself. I do better some nights than others, but like that's generally it. And I try to also honor Sam's note because I think there is something behind Hovstad losing his cool, whether it be outward anger or hurt. You know, it's some rough stuff that Stockman says in that moment, and it's a culmination of a pattern that starts in the beginning of the play. If you really listen, this pattern of him calling people or relating people to animals, and it sort of culminates there. And I think once he says it, there's no there's no other way to react because it is sort of a hard thing to hear.
Yeah, you're talking about the energy of that scene, which is incredible. And obviously, you're getting so much from your fellow actors, but it's staged. You're at the circle in the square, so it's staged in the round, and the house lights are up. It's a very unique moment that Sam Gold has created where the audience is really becomes characters in this town hall meeting. I just wanted to get a sense from you, night after night, how much does the energy in that audience change? Can you feel, as you're playing it, are they sometimes more on the side of the town versus Stockman? Like how does it evolve? And now that you've been doing the show, for a month or two, how has the experience been for you as an actor to not necessarily know what's going to happen, when you get to that scene every night?
Um, it's that's a really good question because that's always sort of like I think about that a lot. Early on, because I was still trying to uh it's easy. Oh God, how do I do this? I think there are a lot of factors that go into why the audience uh is almost preconditioned to be on the doctor's side. Um, and some of those factors are those audience members love Jeremy. You know what I mean? That's just one, and I think that's a small factor because once you get into play, then you start to follow it. But what I think the biggest thing is that the audience is in a convenient position of being knowledgeable about what is being spoken about climate change, about infected waters or contaminated waters, about what dirty water can do to a human and how that can spread. And so when I started to realize that and had a really big desire to get them on my side through this very specific language, when I realized that they weren't, Caleb was getting upset. And I had to step back and sort of let that go because I wasn't honoring the story. I wasn't honoring Hovstad. I wasn't honoring the writing. I wasn't honoring the direction. And I just had to be like, they're going to take what they want from this. And what I need to do is tell my part of the story. And if one person walks away saying he had a point, then I've done my job. Um, so the energy when that was taking place, the energy was always like I would stare audience members down. I was like, I've talked to audience members, like I've sort of been like, called them out. But since I sort of made that shift, now for the most part, I don't generally get the sense that the majority of them are on my side. To be honest, when that poodle versus stray line is delivered, there are still a lot of laughs. And like I said early on, that would have made me upset. But now I'm just sort of like, nothing you can really do about it. But I do count it as uh not a win, but like I've done something enough or we've done something enough where instead, like amongst the laughs, if I get a like, ooh, as he's saying it, or when I hit the like, that's offensive, somebody goes like, you know what I mean? Then I'm like, they're piecing it together. They're piecing it together that this is like more than just people like, you know, setting fire to the proverbial witch that is Dr. Stockman. This is not just that. This is like he's flawed as well. And this is why it's so hard for us maybe to like give him as much of a platform as he thinks he deserves. And it's because of these personal relationships. And when I can get that sort of feeling from them, I think then maybe we're doing a really good job. I got a note from our um assistant director the other day who comes and just sort of checks on us every once in a while, and he wrote, he was like, I was sitting in the audience during that scene and I felt like there were actually a few people who are on Hovstad's side. And it's not like I go into it trying to get people onto my side anymore. It's more so that I want people to understand the full picture of the story. There's the story, there's the plot, right, which is the water, but then there's also the the relationships. And I think the relationship between Hovstad and Stockman is so rich and beautiful. Like these men are friends. Like I wish I could see more of how close they became and like talk. You know, we talked about how we imagine like at home they intellectualize and they debate and they do all this stuff. And so when that hits, I it's important to me for people to see the fraying of what that relationship is. And even so, it's for me, it's harder in the end. Um, I'm still as an actor, it's like it's a scene that like is such a puzzle and you love it, but you hate it at the same time because you don't know if you crack it or not. But yeah, I think I hope I answered the question. I mean, the audience is the audience, and I think ultimately they're just excited to feel like they're a part of it, you know.
Yeah, it's incredibly electric, and I love hearing, how it affects you night to night. Caleb, congratulations on An Enemy of the People. Thank you so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thanks, I appreciate it, man.